Good afternoon, and welcome to the iGaming podcast. Today with Allan Stone, the CEO and co-founder of Intelitics. How are you doing today, Allan?
Good. How are you?
Very, very good. Thank you. This is actually the first time I'm recording this podcast in the evening, so I actually made a mistake just not saying good afternoon, because I'm so used to doing this at a certain time every day, but. There's a first time for everything, and where you are, it's the completely opposite. It's morning.
Morning, 9 a.m.
Yeah. You're in California, right?
Yep, California.
Yeah, awesome. So Allan, Intelitics, obviously a tracking platform for performance marketing platform. Can you explain a little bit more, just for the viewers, to start with, what it is that you specialize on?
Yeah, sure. So Intelitics is a marketing analytics and business intelligence platform that we built specifically for the iGaming space. So we help operators track all of their performance marketing for acquisition across all their channels. So everything from affiliates to internal media buys to third-party media companies to agencies to any of their programmatic display or PPC. We help them track and understand where they're deploying that capital to acquire customers and how efficiently they're doing that.
Cool. And obviously, your background comes as well. Like, you have built kind of like affiliate networks in the past, right? And if I remember this correctly, like one of the reasons that you started Intelitics is kind of this service was kind of lacking a little bit for yourself as well, right? To be able to collect the data that you needed.
Yeah. So our background is as media buyers. We've been my business partners have been in the iGaming space for a very long time, since its inception. And I got introduced to iGaming back in 2008, 2009. Didn't get really involved until 2011, but we saw a real clear opportunity around 2012, just with the shift of consumer behavior, additional regulation happening, both domestically here in the US as well as around the world, and the rise of programmatic and biddable media platforms. We just saw an opportunity to start to carve out more acquisition channels for partners other than SEO and other than sort of the traditional acquisition channels they were using, that were primarily just historical and legacy acquisition channels. We wanted to bring in some new, fresh, data-driven acquisition channels, and so that's the opportunity that we saw.
Yeah, and this is to me, this is really interesting, because obviously you're sitting on a lot of data, and throughout the years being able to kind of measure the shifting consumer behavior and understanding the customer for based on the demographics and all kinds of different things. It'll be really interesting to talk a little bit more today on kind of where we have seen the trends going in the past, kind of learning from that. What the trends are at the moment and where we are heading towards in the future. So
sure.
I'd like to just start this conversation by then taking a step back, just to put a little bit more perspective into this discussion. Because in our prep call, we talked about a previous paradigm shift in the consumer behavior of the customers, were this big shift from desktop to mobile, and you talked about how you guys were very early in kind of understanding that paradigm shift. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of before people realized this shift, what your thoughts were and how you understood that was a shift that was about to happen?
Yeah, so I mean, we were fortunate in that we saw the shift happening in the verticals other than gaming, right? Like we came from, we were doing quite a bit in the consumer finance vertical and the fintech verticals, and we saw that with the rise of sort of the iPhone and smartphone, as well as tablets, and the user adoption of those, as well as less and less time spent on desktop screens, and then the rise of these massive ad platforms on Facebook and Twitter and just the more advanced advertising platforms, we just saw that consumer shift happening, and so people were engaging. People were sitting down less and less and playing for hours at a time on their desktop, and more engaging in micro sessions on their mobile devices when they were commuting, or when they just had downtime at work or at school or whenever. And so we started to see that happen based on our behavior as consumers ourselves, but then also just in what the data was showing us. We started seeing conversion rates on desktop start to fall. We started seeing more and more traffic opportunities on mobile start to arise that just didn't exist prior. And so really that shift was driven mostly by, again, the cell phone, the proliferation of data plans throughout the world, how cheap these smart technologies were getting, how much bigger the screens were getting, as well as the tablets and just the interconnectivity of the consumer, as opposed to them having to be locked into their house or wherever their computer was. And so, we saw it early on, again, just based on what we were doing outside of gaming, and then saw a handful of operators starting to really take advantage of that early on, and decided to see, if we could start testing different channels, different opportunities, and start to prove out, hey, are these channels, are these mobile specific or tablet specific channels going to be viable channels for operators, and just using data and testing it. So
yeah, it's interesting because we're sitting here in 2020 and looking back, it seemed like such an obvious paradigm shift. It was staring us in the eye all along at that time. But I remember for myself, okay, so at that time, when the mobile shift started to happening within iGaming, I think around 2011, 2012 or something like that. I was working for Betsson Group at that time. Okay, so quite large operator in Scandinavia, and obviously operating in the Scandinavian market is a heavily tech fluent market, right? So that's where the shift happens first, let's say. But still, during that time, there was no talk about mobile at that time. Even that late, and I mean, if we look at the trends now, like, the iPhone was launched, the first iPhone was like 2005 or something, 2006, and every year exponential growth, but it only took until like 2012 or so, where a lot of the operators started taking mobile serious. Why do you think that it's that you can kind of oversee such an obvious paradigm shift that it's in hindsight now we can say that it was?
Look, I think it's there's a number of factors that lead into why that hindsight. I mean, why it was overlooked or just wasn't prioritized, right? I think it starts with the technology, right? The gaming technology itself, the platforms. I think those platforms were slow to move, for whatever reason. I don't know exactly why, but the consumer experience on a native mobile is much different than desktop. And I think just reimagining that experience for a lot of these platform providers was something that was out of the realm of what they were comfortable with. I also think it's one of those things where we're in an industry, fortunately, where if you have a good product and you've got good messaging, you make a lot of money. And so a lot of these larger operators are just very well established. They had a very their operations were established. It was like, why are we going to disrupt what's working, right? Why are we going to disrupt what's making money for us? As I think there was a little bit of that. I also think there was a limited. I think part of it was there was limited solutions being offered to operators. I don't think there was anybody really pushing the operators to start to move in that direction. I mean, I think there were a lot of variables at play. I think we were pretty early on in terms of pushing operators, right? When we came and we had specific channels of traffic that we wanted to leverage as acquisition channels for operators, but then we also wanted to be able to not only buy ads on those channels, but also be able to drive to specific products for the operators, and just found it very challenging. And it wasn't because the operators weren't interested. It was because they just they were limited in what they could do based on the technology stack. And so I think there was unfortunately, fortunately, however you want to look at it, there was, the entire technology stack for the operators had to be overhauled in order for them to be able to take advantage of that opportunity. And I still think it's still happening. I mean, you still have, there's still a lot of opportunity, for operators to capture on mobile, and on these different, channels of traffic, and it's a lot of it boils down to just their ability to technically be able to optimize and to capitalize on those channels. Yeah,
true. And I mean, I guess on a more human level as well. I mean, we were very busy on our day-to-day operations, right? Like you get bogged down in your to-do list that is 100 tasks long, and you don't really see the bigger picture sometimes when you're as busy executing your backlog and so forth. And I think that's where like LeoVegas then came in, as a new operator, mobile first, and obviously became huge because they were a little bit ahead of the others in their shift on there.
I think part of it too was the gatekeepers on the mobile ecosystem, right? You had Apple and Google who just weren't. I don't want to say they were hostile, but they just weren't friendly towards iGaming at the time, right? It was still very. I mean, those two companies are still, they're U.S. based companies. Online gambling in the U.S. wasn't regulated then. No one really understood what that opportunity was, and so for them, it was just it was if it ain't, it was almost like they had no reason to be nice. And now they have, fortunately, I think they've seen the opportunity that exists for them as well as for their, opening up the ecosystem for gaming for the consumers that engage with that ecosystem. So I think that was another part of it was that, the gatekeepers of those ecosystems just weren't. They were benevolent, right? They weren't hostile per se, but they also weren't accommodating either. So again, if you're an operator and you're trying to you want to make a business case to go and attack this channel, but the gatekeepers of that channel aren't going to be there to facilitate or help you to capitalize on opportunity. Why would you invest there as aggressively as you did? But I agree with you. I mean, look, we saw LeoVegas very early on capitalize on that opportunity, and everyone sees where they're at now. I mean, they are market leaders because they saw this, they saw that opportunity and they took advantage of it. Like you said, just barely before everybody else, but they were a first mover.
Yeah, exactly. That's all that's needed, right? Because when the operators noticed the success of LeoVegas, they followed suit, obviously. So that's what happened. So Allan, that begs the obvious follow-up question to this discussion, which is then if the mobile paradigm shift was staring us right in the face for years, and it didn't happen until later than it should have probably, then what is kind of the next paradigm shift in the industry? Is there any indications of new emerging tech or any other development in tech world that can potentially disrupt the industry again? And I would just like to add in here. I think even disruptive technologies like trustless pay and play, for example, which also changed the landscape to some extent in the northern markets, can be a disruptive technology as well, which was overlooked until it was proven the success. So tell me, like, do you see any trends or anything to keep an eye on at the moment for the operators?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different trends that we're watching. I think, in terms of what is still early on, and I don't think there's anything necessarily staring us in the face right now that operators aren't taking advantage of. I think because of the experience with being slow to adopt mobile, I think operators have swung the other way, and they're pushing their technology providers, and they're pushing their product teams, and they're pushing their strategy teams to start to be more proactive as to identifying these new trends. From our perspective, the things that we're watching, I don't know there's any paradigm shifts necessarily, but the things that we're watching and just keeping an eye on to see, okay, how are these things going to make consumer engagement with gambling products easier or more efficient. So things like you mentioned, I mean, the trustless pay and play stuff. That stuff is, as that rolls out worldwide, based on different bankings modernizing, different banking systems modernizing. That could be really interesting to watch. We're looking at crypto pretty aggressively in terms of what is that going to do for ease of playability with consumers. Again, lots of regulation still needs to happen there, but there's some interesting things happening. We look at new products that are emerging like esports, right? There's a lot of operators that have sportsbooks are looking at the esports market and what that's bringing. COVID has accelerated, I think, the esports market because people are staying at home playing. Personally, I think there's a massive opportunity with the P2P, peer-to-peer esports betting opportunity. I don't think very many operators are taking advantage of that yet. It's still sort of the traditional, betting on the highest, the top 100 players in esports or the top 100 matches or games in esports. So I think there's still a big opportunity, almost like what poker. If you were to look at it, think of it more as almost like a poker play. I think that could be huge. And then I still think it's the jury's still out on AR and VR. I think there's a lot more activity. There's a lot more consumer adoption happening with VR. Again, because of COVID, people are staying home. They're looking for more entertainment. And so you've got a consumer base that's much more engaged with those products. So seeing, what is the opportunity there? And I think one of the big frontiers, and it's still early, but I think it could be massive for gaming is the connected TV, right? How much smarter are the TVs going to become that are in consumer households? Almost moving from, the TV becoming the new desktop. What is that going to look like? What kind of products can operators put into market for consumers that are engaging on the TV, and then cross-screen engagement, right? So something that maybe involves a tablet or a smartphone as well as the connected TV. I think there's some interesting developments there, and again, the TVs are doing nothing but getting smarter and more interactive. So that could be a really interesting new frontier as well for operators.
Yeah, fair enough. So if we move into like the field of marketing, I think the discussion is similar there in the sense that like these days there's so many new channels and other channels are being added all the time to be able to reach out with your message. And I guess this is kind of your specialty at the moment, kind of the marketing channels and so forth. So I also like to ask you there, like what is your like analysis of various marketing channels at the moment? And same thing here, where are the trends going in acquiring players most efficiently?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of emerging channels, and you've got platforms. TikTok is investing heavily in their advertising platform to give advertisers more control over targeting and optimizations. I mean, Facebook and Google are still the behemoths, right? They still control so much of users' attention. I think the opportunity that exists for operators is just to better optimize and leverage those existing channels. I still think, if you look across the board, the conversion rates from an initial impression to first purchase, it's still very low in this industry compared to other industries. There's a number of factors that lead to that, but I think there's a lot of that has to do with just the general product improvement that still needs to happen within iGaming.
Where do you see like most friction right now in the conversion funnel? Speaking about that.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest friction point is ease of use, ease of first purchase, right? I mean, the fact that consumers still have to jump through hoops in a lot of cases just to be able to give an operator money. There's a lot of reasons for that. It's not just on the operators, right? But we see that friction point. We see that as the biggest friction point right now, is how do we get people who have expressed an interest, right? i.e. they've clicked on an ad, they've maybe even submitted some of their information, but they haven't made a first purchase. What is that? How do we remove the friction from that process as much as possible? I think the pay and play stuff was a very interesting first step. It was limited in terms of the markets that were able to roll it out, but I think you still have. It was also limited in terms of the availability of the consumers. They had to have specific cards. They had to have specific issuing banks to be able to do that, right? Yeah. And so I think just a greater adoption or wider spread of technology that allows more consumers who might be interested greater opportunity to engage with the products and be able to actually give operators their money. Yeah. That's the greatest friction point that we see right now, is just from initial interest to actually being able to make a first purchase and play. And so that's where we focus a lot of our attention in terms of our data, just to help operators understand the fall off, where are consumers falling off in the funnel, and where can we re-engage them to get them to come back in. Yeah,
exactly. That's interesting you say that, and I think Trustly really kind of paved the way with the pay and play product in a sense where Sweden was kind of the test market, and let's say where it was so obvious that you cannot operate your brand in Sweden now if you don't have pay and play. Like, that's how obvious it is. So it kind of paves the way to show what there is no doubt that your number one kind of priority acquiring customers should be to remove friction, even if it means that you have to give up your registration process, for example,
right.
which is why a lot of people doubted them in the beginning, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, when we look at it, it's, I think our perspective is a little bit jaded, again, because of where we come from. But one of the things I look at is how easy is it for me to go to Vegas and walk from one casino to the next, right? And I look at it as almost the same for a consumer. If I'm on my phone and I want to go from, operator, one operator to the next, it shouldn't be a challenge. The operator shouldn't see that as a challenge. They should see it as an opportunity to differentiate their brand, differentiate their product, differentiate their, what their brand means to the consumers, and we see that, right? The average casino player. We were looking at some of our data. I mean, we track a lot of different players, and right now the average player has 4.8 gaming accounts. So, if an operator lands a player, chances are they're competing with at least 3, potentially 4 other operators. So, how are you going to differentiate? And so I think that's a massive opportunity for operators as well. Is, the opportunity is eliminate the friction. The players are going to gravitate towards the places where it's the easiest for them to be able to play, and that's everything from how well are you, what's your marketing message and where are you reaching those consumers with your message. I think that's another opportunity that we see a lot of operators missing, or just an easy win for them is, hey, if you've got someone who's on their mobile phone, right? If they click an ad on their mobile phone and they're engaging with you and they're on their phone, why would you send them an email to re-engage with them? Why wouldn't you send them an SMS or even Facebook Messenger? If you knew that a consumer came from Facebook and they were engaging with your product and your ads on Facebook, why wouldn't you engage with them on the channel with which they're engaging with you, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of creative opportunities for operators to take advantage of those things as well.
Yeah, interesting, like you're saying, and not just kind of standardized your messaging then, but the goal should be to tailor your messaging to each client kind of thing, depending on how they have interacted with you, something like this, and the data that you have on them.
Yeah, I mean, it should definitely inform. It should definitely inform your marketing messaging. It shouldn't just be a cookie cutter. The marketing messaging should be informed by what the consumers are telling you, which is, hey, I'm on this device, I'm engaging with you at these times. That sort of cookie cutter approach, it works, right? Better than nothing, but there's a lot more efficiency that can be had if there's some very specific customized messaging involved in reaching and engaging with the players.
Yeah, interesting. That begs the question, and something we discussed as well in our prep call, which is the fact that your company is obviously based on all the data that you collect and the analysis you can do of that to be able to understand player behavior and so forth better. Now, there is this old school way of doing media, the traditional media. Newspaper, TV ads, and so forth, which I think is an important part for the iGaming industry, but it's not as easy perhaps to detract data from those type of channels. When we move into the future now, do you think kind of the traditional media is dead, or will they have to figure out ways how to collect data better to provide their customers with more information on the results they are achieving?
Yeah, I don't think it's dead necessarily. I mean, I think again, we touched on it earlier. I think traditional TV advertising is moving more and more to connected devices, right? So you're going to be able to. There are more and more opportunities to be able to understand. Hey, if I'm running an ad on a TV, what is that? First of all, who am I reaching, right? Instead of the traditional way of finding a particular program or a particular time slot and having a demographic that fits that particular program or time slot, you can actually customize and say, hey, you know what, we want to reach households who are watching this particular event that have these other criteria. And because of these smart TVs, because of how people are engaging with what they're doing, right, and streaming as opposed to over the wire TV watching, you now have access to that data and that targeting ability. So becoming much more intelligent with those quote unquote traditional buys. There's definitely an opportunity there. We're seeing a lot of stuff emerging around that right now. in terms of like traditional print and things like that, look, I think they always serve a purpose, right? I mean, at the end of the day, they're touch points with consumers, and you always want to make sure that your brand is top of mind with consumers. I do think there's some interesting things to track there. I think some operators have done some custom URLs, or maybe they even set up custom brands where they only run this brand on this particular magazine or print or whatever. I think, again, you got to look at the trends of what's happening with COVID. Now everything's going contactless. So, a technology that's 15, 20 years old, QR codes, which was very slow to consumer adoption, and especially in developed markets, in developed countries, you're starting to see more and more consumer adoption of those things now, right? You've got NFC chips, right, where you now can place an NFC chip on a billboard for a bus station or a train station, and now people can walk up with their phone and engage with that particular advertisement right there, and you can track that. That's all trackable. It's all so exactly how many people engaged with that advertisement that was at that station. So again, it's all technology. It's all we're just following consumer trends and what they're doing, and trying to help operators understand what those trends and opportunities are. But the more that things become connected, the more opportunities there are for operators to track and understand what's actually driving success for them. Where are their best players coming from? What do they look like, and how are they engaged with their products? And really understanding that is really the key to optimizing. Hey, this is our budget for this month. How are we going to acquire more players?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point what you're saying with NFC, for example, which is also one of these technologies that it's been around for a couple of years, but it feels, at least to me, I'm just speaking for myself, I just started using NFC and starting to pay with my phone like last month. I discovered that I was able to do that with my iPhone 10, basically, and since then, I use, when I do it once, then I do it forever. It's one of these technologies that it's just so obvious much better. And same with QR codes. When you discover that, I just need to point my camera literally at the QR code and it will automatically open this page for me. Then immediately you understand that is something you can do the next time you see a QR code. You associate it, you get the connection in your brain, basically. And maybe the advancement of these technologies is what will kind of save the traditional media that is difficult for the advertisers themselves for the billboard owner itself to measure. It can be measured directly from the advertiser, just by the fact that it's so easy to use the NFC functionality or the QR functionality. So maybe that is what will kind of make it easier for the advertiser to measure the actual results from these campaigns, because that's what we have been faced with sometimes, because we do both traditional media and digital media, as we are doing now. So when we print our magazines, for example, we have a printed version of our magazine, and often we get faced with the argument that it's probably a waste of money. We don't know if it's good or if it's not good.
Right.
And then on the other hand, to the left here, you have 10 other marketing channels that you will know exactly on the dot your ROI. So every single marketing manager these days will choose the safe option, more or less.
Right.
So I guess that is an important part to remember as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a healthy mix, right? I mean, you've got to look at it, because marketing, performance marketing is one aspect of it, but you still have to be able to establish your brand. And there is a little bit of, you can definitely track that as much and as intelligently as possible. But there is still a little bit of a social proof, if you will, or brand association, right? So even though you might not be able to track specifically what that engagement on that print advertisement is, there is still the opportunity cost of, well, if you're not there, who is going to be there? What does that look like? And it does. I mean, the technology is there, right? I mean, anyone who has any sort of qualms around, I can't track this. Yes, you can. You just have to get creative about it, right? And so, put a QR code in your advertisement and put a call to action there, just the same way you would on a digital banner, and see what people engage, see who engages and what they engage like. You might find that, you don't get the same number of eyeballs from that print engagement as you would from a Facebook ad or whatever, a TikTok ad, but the players or the people that are engaging with that are more valuable or not.
Yeah.
It's all numbers, it's data, right? At the end of the day, that's what we always say is just let the numbers tell you what's happening and what's not.
Yeah, interesting. And speaking about NFC functionality, you talked as well about how this functionality is possible to basically implement in stadiums at like football games or whatnot to target specific people with specific adverts in the actual stadium. It's the first I hear of that. Can you elaborate on that a bit, how that will work?
Yeah. I mean, without giving away too much, but yeah, I mean, we've tested some things where by leveraging technology that allows us to understand where people are specifically, because again, you're using your mobile device. You always have it with you, right? So we've actually run campaigns where we've targeted consumers who are within a certain distance of that stadium for that particular sporting event, and you tailor your ad messaging for the event that's happening, right? So here in the US, if it's an NFL game at an NFL stadium, you can tailor that. Right now it's not as relevant because there's not much in-person viewership in the sense of there's no one at the stadiums yet, right? Again, because of COVID. But once it does, once the stadiums and these events start to open back up, there's a massive opportunity to be, again, just more intelligent with how it is you're reaching the people that you want to be reaching and engaging with in order to get them to give you their money, engage with your product.
So how does it work with the NFC functionality? So if I'm in a stadium, I have my iPhone. Will I need to?
There's a couple different.
How do I get
there's
the
a couple different ways.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So you have location data within the application, so you can set the location, the specific geolocation of those stadiums. So anyone that's engaged with your app is at the stadium. You know where they are.
Yeah. But how do you push the message into the phone? As in, how do you force the message to pop up on the screen?
Sure. There's a couple different ways to do that. In-app notification. So again, if they have your app already on the phone, you can engage with it there. We've tested, there's a lot of different ways we've tested engagement. We've tested putting QR codes in the back of receipts from the concessions within the stadium. We've tested, there's a couple of things that we've done that have been proprietary. I don't really want to talk about it right now because there's a good opportunity. There's also, look, the stadium, and here's the thing, I'll tell you, the people who own the stadium, the sports teams, they want additional engagement with their consumer base. So they're willing to do deals where, they'll say, hey, we've got our, we know who our season ticket holders are. We can reach them. So partnership, we've done partnership deals where we actually go to the actual sports teams themselves because they want to know more about their customer, right? And they want to have offer a better experience for their customer. And if that means being able to provide a seamless betting opportunity in stadium, then they want to do that. So we've done some exploratory stuff with those types of team partnerships as well. There's just a lot of different creative ways to do it.
Yeah, it's super interesting to hear because like you're saying, like now using this technology, being able to track your demographics in the real world is becoming more accessible, basically. And obviously, as an advertiser, that's what you want. In the end of the day, you want to be able to track your specific demographic as specific as possible, right?
Right.
More and more.
It's becoming more and more accessible, but it's also becoming more and more challenging because, again, the gatekeepers of these platforms, right? Apple, Google, they're becoming more consumer conscious, right? And so they're putting technology in place that blocks people from being able to do those types of things. Now, I will say this though: all the efforts that they've made around that have been geared towards limiting the data that can be shared across partners. But if a customer is engaged with your product, right, i.e. they have your app or they're engaged with you as a brand, they're not trying to limit your ability to reach your existing customer base. What they're trying to do is limit the ability of a nefarious third party from being able to understand, basically understand that data and then resell it, right? So even for a brand, there's still a lot of opportunity. There might not be the same type of data sharing opportunities that exist now in the future, but you're still going to have very creative ways that you can engage with your consumer base.
This is actually an interesting discussion I wanted to open up as well. So you have this kind of war for privacy going on, right? Where companies like Google, where their entire business model is based on collecting data and then being able to sell that data to advertisers or make it possible for advertisers to target their customers, obviously. And then on the other hand, on the other side of the coin, you have Apple, where it's a pure hardware company, doesn't really care about collecting too much data because they don't really have an advertisement platform themselves, and who are trying to limit the collection of data. And it feels a little bit like it's this like war going on between like privacy versus data collection. And first of all, do you agree with that statement, and how do you see this playing out as we go forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest development is putting the control of consumer data in their hands, right? I think that was the big thing that you had, was you just had a lot of people collecting data and consumers didn't know it. They knew that, hey, some information being collected on me, but they didn't know to what extent, right? So I think what you're seeing is an overreaction, and I think what'll end up happening is something, to level out. I think part of this is consumers just becoming more aware of what, how valuable their data is and what information they want to and don't want to share, and giving them that control. So I think there is an ebb and flow, there is a push and pull here. So I don't necessarily, I mean, to me, the jury's still out. Like, I don't think anyone did anything wrong per se. There's obviously been some nefarious guys when it comes to data, but it wasn't any of the big guys, right? I mean,
Cambridge Analytica type situations.
Right. But they broke the law by hacking into Facebook anyway, right? So it wasn't like Facebook was necessarily, I mean, ultimately they were responsible because it was their platform and it was their user data, right? So they are responsible for that. So, but I think what you're seeing now is that consumers are becoming more educated as to how valuable their data is. They're also becoming more educated as to, hey, if I use this application, it's not just tracking what I'm doing within the application, it's also tracking me here, and here. Or if I'm on this website, they're not just sitting, when I navigate away from the website, they're not, they're still tracking what I'm doing. So I think a better understanding for consumers of that, and I think that the moves that are happening right now at the platform level with Apple and with Google are, I think they're making the correct moves to give the consumer at least the choice. I think there's a long way to go still. I think there's there are certain consumers who said, hey, you know what, I don't want you to track any of my data, but I'm willing to pay for this product. I think the problem is the model was, we got trained early on as consumers to expect that everything on the internet was free. Well, it was free in the monetary sense, right? We didn't have to pay for it, but we had to give up a very valuable, a very important and valuable asset, which is our data. So, I think there's a little bit of an overcorrection happening. I think it'll level out, and I think, we'll there's nothing that's going to be detrimental. I don't think that's happening from what I can see. Because again, for the most part, anyone that has anything to do with any type of data is trying to protect that data as much as they can, because A, it's either valuable to them, or B, they don't want to break any of the existing laws, because there's quite a few extensive laws in the books now as to what you can and can't do with consumer data. So, I mean, I think it's just growing pains. We'll learn.
I guess there are like two sides to this, right? Especially, this is becoming a bigger question, and there was the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, that is highlighting this, that has kind of caused a big storm. A lot of people are looking at Facebook as something evil these days. I remember, back in the day, people saw Facebook as something positive, in general. But then there is the other side of the coin too, which is the fact that it feels that the trend right now is that people prioritize speed over trust, or even like just being comfortable over trust and the security of your own data. And if we compare products, for example, let's say Google Maps in comparison to Apple Maps. On the one hand, you have Google Maps who are collecting a lot of data on your movement, which makes it easier for them to predict the traffic and so forth. And then on the other hand, you have Apple Maps that are not collecting the same amount of data, and it's a lot easier to, or it's a lot more difficult for them to kind of predict the same things that Google Maps can do. But people are gladly using Google Maps, in their day-to-day life. And the question, I guess, is like, who is going to win this tug of war? Because again, you have Apple, massive organization, who are really pushing and promoting the privacy aspect of the whole thing, and reminding people constantly that, like, be careful with your data, because that's what it seems, that if people aren't reminded of it, then they don't seem to care that much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think and Apple has a direct incentive to do that because they, again, you mentioned earlier, they own the hardware, right? So it's they have to make sure that when people are engaging with their hardware, they're protecting them. I think what you're going to end up seeing is, you're right. I think people are willing to give up a little bit of security for convenience. I don't necessarily think that trend is going to change, because that's just consumer behavior. People want things now. They want to be convenient. So I mean,
people complain about the like the social dilemma comes out. They complain for 2 weeks, and they write about how they complain on Facebook, which is ironic. Right. And then 2 weeks later, they forget about it because they are comfortable in their usage of technology. Right? That's how it is.
Yeah. So I think we can talk very high level about this. I think one of the reasons that Facebook and these products became so engaging is because there was a lack of engaging products outside of those products, right? Like, so the reason that people engage with Facebook is because it is a very compelling and interesting product. I think that they moved very quickly. They moved very fast when it came to engaging with people on their mobile devices that are in their pocket, right? In the way that I look at it, is the way you combat this is you put really good engaging products into the market to compete with them. And we haven't, if you look at it, these social apps continuously win UX UI awards because they've just got such an incentive to capture that attention from you. And so in order to combat that, in order to compete with that, you have to have really good product design, really good user experience design. And I think that there's still a massive opportunity for operators, but even for just anyone, to create really engaging apps. And I think that's part of what you're going to see happen, is people are going to start to create more and more engaging apps, because these social products have done a really great job of understanding the psychological impact of how to get people to engage. And I think that there's still, if Facebook's at level 10 in terms of their ability to get people to engage with their product, by social hacking and engineering, I think everyone else is at a 3. So there's still a lot of ground that a lot of these guys can make up against those platforms, and leveraging those platforms, quite frankly, to create a better engaging product, if they just move the needle 1 or 2 spaces. So I think you'll start to see more and more of that as people competing, because I think there's a little bit of consumer fatigue happening as well. I think consumers want a different product to engage with other than these social platforms. There's just not much out there. I see gambling as a really great, the iGaming space has a really great opportunity. If you ask me right now, though, the iGaming space is failing when it comes to product UX UI design. I mean, there are very interesting gimmicks happening in the iGaming product level, like iGaming product innovation. I think there's some, bells and whistles that guys think are really interesting, but nobody's really changed the perception of consumer, user UX UI with consumers in gaming. I can't think of anything off the top of my head where it's like, wow, that is an amazing innovation for iGaming that's going to be massively engaging and competitive with anything, much less differentiating between other gaming customers. And so I think that when we look at it, the only products that I've seen that have sort of captured that attention realistically in the last year and a half have been more on the esports side of things. Okay. Because it is such an emerging, the brands that are attacking esports, you got your big brands that are going at it as an opportunity, right? But there are a lot of really innovative startups that are trying to attack the esports world that are much more engaging from a product perspective, that are starting to capture a lot of attention of consumers, where the big guys just are either going to have to acquire them, or they're just not going to be able to compete. And so I think that's a massive opportunity on gaming, is to create some really interesting product differentiation. And it's not oh, we spin the wheel 3 times faster, or we put the button here instead of there. There's a very clear opportunity for someone to come into the iGaming world with a very fresh, new perspective, on what it means to have an iGaming product and how consumers can engage with it. I liken it to when they put the first touchscreens, the first slot machines that had touchscreens, right? Like, what is that innovation in iGaming? Because that changed. And you go to a casino now, especially here in North America, you go to a casino now and there's every single slot machine is a touchscreen. You've got they put the traditional sort of reel and spin. They'll have a row of them, a bank of them in the corner for the old school guys, right? But for the most part, you walk through a Vegas casino and it is all touchscreen, all immersive. What does that look like? What does that product innovation look like in iGaming?
Yeah, exactly. And like you say, not just the game itself, but also the platform that you're interacting with on the operator side. And it's so interesting. I think like there's so many parallels to draw between the iGaming industry and what makes people tick, and social media and what makes people tick, right? And because the way that Facebook draws you into their platform and holds your attention is very similar to the way you are getting drawn in and sucked into a slot machine game, for example, in the sense that there's this random action that happens and you don't know if you're going to win or if you're going to lose. And similarly to when you look at your phone, and you have notifications, it's like the excitement of looking at your phone and not knowing if you have gotten a notification or not, or checking Facebook and the latest messages and these things. The psychology is very similar. And that is obviously what like a company like Facebook are really trying to take advantage of, and what they are doing so well to keep players engaged with their platform. So that's what you were saying, so is like what gaming can do.
Yes. So what's interesting is that gaming, look, it's again one of those things maybe that is staring us in the face, and so we don't think about it, right? So like you said, when we've seen these discussions happen with these social casinos where they go, it's literally the same mechanisms as was gaming, right? With the actual slot machine, it's gamification, right? It's the actual psychology behind the slot machine, spins, loud noises, blinking lights, you win. It's that whole, it is everything that happens psychologically, yes, with the engagement of that product, right? With the engagement of that experience. For whatever reason, iGaming operators have left it in the box of a slot machine, right? Exactly. Like they haven't taken that gamification out of the slot machine experience and put it across their entire product, right? So it's not just, when you're playing the slot machine game, that's happening. It's when you log in, what happens when you log into that platform? What happens when you're not engaging with them to get you to come back and re-engage with the product? What are you doing in order to create that gamification and that endorphin rush that people get when they see that Facebook notification, or they see that they see that mention coming from somebody? And again, I think it's just because we're in it, right? We're in it every day, and so we can't see the forest through the trees, right?
Exactly.
I think there's, and to give some operators credit, I mean, there are guys that I think started to push that. You look at something like Casumo or Casino Hero. I think those guys were trying to, the gamification of casino play. I think that was, they were started to try and push those limits a little bit. But it's not something that's really widespread yet in terms of all the operators. And again, I still think there's a lot of opportunity to push those bounds.
Yeah, and again, drawing parallels to social media, in Sweden, where I'm raised, we had social media platforms from the very early 2000s, like well before Facebook was born. And this was a cultural thing in Sweden. Everyone had this particular social media platform. And then it changed a couple of years later to the trends shifted to something else, and then to something else, and so forth. But when Facebook came, there were a lot of different social media platforms in Sweden. All had their own little niche, so to say. But when Facebook came, all of them died. All of them.
Right.
Like over the span of a couple of months, they just died. Everyone moved to Facebook, and the reason for that now, I realize, is just what you are talking about now, which is the fact that Facebook managed to really go into your psychology and how to trigger you to get these endorphin kicks to keep you going back to Facebook specifically. Whereas these other social media networks, their only task was to connect people. and it may be because you had a certain interest or whatnot, but they didn't dig into the psychology of human beings the way Facebook did, and that obviously was a very powerful thing for Facebook. So maybe the operators right now have a similar mindset to the early social media sites in the 2000s in Sweden, which is they had a nice layout, for example, or they had a certain niche, or they had something different that the others didn't have, but they have not thought about the psychology of the player. Maybe.
Yeah, and again, I think that they're maybe they are, but it's in the context of their specific gambling products, right? It's hey, the psychology behind a slot game, the psychology behind table games, the psychology behind sports betting, right? But take that outside of those boxes, right? In the sense of, okay, well, how do you make the product, regardless of which of those particular games that people are engaging with, how do you make the entire product that immersive and that engaging? And I think there's some guys trying some things, but I don't think, there's a lot of reasons why. Again, I go back to, I think a lot of it is just the technology that exists right now for operators to use without building it completely from scratch themselves. I think that a lot of operators are limited based on the technology solutions that are out there. And that's not to say that the products or the technology is bad. It's just, if you look at what's available to operators, there's still not a ton of push in terms of innovation from these casino platforms to really drive operators, or at least equip the operators to be able to take advantage of the opportunity that exists.
Good point. It's interesting parallels to Facebook, multi-billion euro organization who have really understood the psychology of human beings, and took it to a different level. Allan, the time is running out here, but I want to touch on one last subject before we stop today, which is the American market, which I think is a good subject for today as well, since you literally have boots on the ground over there. American election is over. At least that's what half of your country thinks. And we have an outcome there, more or less. What is your expectation now as we move forward into 2021 with the American market? How do you see this developing? The stock market has an incredible high expectation of the American gambling future iGaming market. We see that with DraftKings, who have very low revenue, but they have insanely high valuation by the shareholders, putting a lot of pressure on this. So what's your analysis of the American market?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're here. We're fortunate in that this is where we live, so we can kind of get a little bit better access to some of the information and data coming out. I think the market's bullish on it, but rightfully so. It's very difficult to nail down what the actual market opportunity is in the United States. Just because it's fragmented based on state, and then the states have you've got the sort of call it the old school, we call them the offshore, right? The illegal gambling operations. How big are those guys really? True, it's hard to gauge how big those guys are and what sort of impact they're going to have long term as states continue to regulate. Here's what I can tell you. Everything that I've seen so far has been positive momentum, right? There's more and more states coming online. There's more and more states who see it as a viable revenue opportunity based on the success of New Jersey and Pennsylvania early on. So for us, we're looking at it as, hey, we're bullish on the market ourselves. It's a very different market than the rest of the world, right? It's a very immature market from a gambling perspective, if you look at it, right? Whereas the rest of the world has been playing online since the early 2000s. The consumer behavior here it's not there yet. We see that specifically in sports betting, right? You look at the guys who've come over from Europe and tried to just bring the European betting, the European betting product and methodology here. The North American bettor is much different than the European bettor. It's a much different environment. And it's also a different environment in terms of the opportunities for operators to engage with consumers. You have to compete in this market. You have to be able to compete with really compelling non-gambling products, right? You're competing for consumer attention with products, with non-gambling products, and the channels for consumer behavior are much different here than in Europe or in Asia or in these other places where a lot of these operators are conducting business. So the markets, look, I think it's going to continue to grow. In terms of stocks right now, if you ask me, I think they're a little bit inflated, but I don't think it's unreasonable. I mean, the values that you're seeing, I mean, that's the other thing you got to remember too. The market is projecting its future valuation, right? What are these brands going to be able to produce in the future? And I think they're a little bit, there's a little bit of a run right now because of how it's an emerging market that everybody knows is going to be massive. It's just not clear yet how massive. Right?
Exactly, that's the difficulty, right? Like, and how long is it going to take before it comes to fruition as well? Like you're saying, it's a whole culture that needs to be taught how to play online gambling. It has never existed in your culture except for the poker boom in the 2000s. I mean.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you saw how big that market got very quickly, right?
Yeah.
And and there was a vacuum there, right? When poker got pushed out, there's a lot of people who are already trained or already used to gambling, and they have got no outlet for that, or they do, but it's not. There's no legal outlet for them. So as the legal outlets come in, they're going to start to shift there. Look, I think the opportunity is, I think, as an aggregate, each one of the states themselves is an interesting micro economy, if you will. But a couple data points we look at. Look at New Jersey. New Jersey was the first state in the United States to regulate. It's the size of Sweden. So Swedish market in terms of population, they're very similar in size, right? So you look at a market like Sweden, which is one of the largest gambling markets in the world, one of the largest regulated gambling markets in the world. New Jersey should be there fairly quickly. You have New York, which it's the regulation is taking much longer there. That's a much larger population opportunity with a lot more economic incentive to be able to go online. So those two states alone could be very interesting. You look at California. California, I think, is the sixth largest GDP in the world as a state. Right. So when that state regulates, I mean, we know the numbers. We know what the offline market is here. It's massive. It's a multi-billion-dollar a year offline market. Yeah. The online market is not going to cannibalize that. It's going to cause the offline market to grow, and it's going to be an exponential growth in the total market of California in terms of gambling. So, I mean, we're bullish. We're watching it. The challenge here is just the regulatory environment, the regulatory framework. It's got to be state by state. It's going to be very difficult for anything to pass at a federal level, if at all. But the states there's a ton of activity happening. The guys, Chris Grove and those guys do a really good job of covering all the different legal, updates and what's happening in each of those states. So we follow that as closely as possible.
Very interesting. And something I've been thinking about as well is, like you're saying, the US as a market is a different animal to penetrate, obviously. A lot of these very well-known European gaming brands that are huge, like you look at William Hill, the GVC with Ladbrokes, and all these brands. They have massive brand equity within Europe, but they have zero brand equity within the US. Okay, and that's where companies like DraftKings and FanDuel and MGM and all this comes into play, right? Because for the US consumer, it seems like brand equity is something very, very important to them. So how do you enter and succeed in the US if you are like a mid-sized European operator? Is it even possible to do using their own brand? I mean, not having
I think it's a challenge. I mean, look, you look at the European operators, even those guys, they did partnerships, right? GVC has the joint venture partnership with MGM with Roar. You've got, William Hill's got the JV partnership that they've done, the acquisition that they've done. So, I mean, I think it's.
But if you're a smaller operator, let's say, because GVC, yes, they have the liquidity, they can partner with MGM. Same with Will Hill, they acquired by Caesars and so forth. But if you are like Betson, for example, medium-sized operator, if you are Casino, if you are Hero Gaming, how is it even possible to scratch the surface on that market? It's challenging, right? Because you have the way that, and this just goes down to the regulatory framework, right? The way that the regulation's happening in each one of these states is, you've got to have basically operations in the state in order to be able to offer a license there. They were to be able to to acquire a license there.
I think there's still opportunity for some really interesting joint ventures, because you look at, again, it's a fragmented approach, right? Because each one of the states, there's different players in each state, and there's different compelling reasons for, an operator, an online or offline operator in the state of Iowa, for example, to partner with, a mid-level operator from Europe to help them go online, So I think the biggest opportunity for these mid-size operators to come into the US is their expertise, right? Understanding how to run an online gaming operation, because it is very different than an offline operation. Product differentiation. How is it that those mid-sized products are going to differ from the bigger brands? What are they going to do to differentiate? It is a challenge. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, there's a great opportunity for mid-sized operators to come to the North American market. Just the way that the regulatory framework is shaking out, it doesn't look like there's a really clear opportunity for a bunch of mid-sized operators from Europe to come in and capitalize an opportunity here. The real opportunity in the US market is still on a platform level. You've got each one of the brands is going to do their own decision making, whether they want to build the brand themselves or whether they want to partner with someone who's already built those brands elsewhere and just bring that expertise here to the US. And I think the jury's still out on which way is the right way to go. You've got really great native North American brands like The Score. You've got Parks in Pennsylvania, which is it is a Pennsylvania operation. They're going at it themselves. So there's a lot of different ways that operators are going to attack going online. And I think there is opportunity strategically for maybe some mid-sized operators to come here in some of the specific states. But I think, what you're seeing with GVC, Will Hill, and what those guys have done is really kind of if you're going to create a partner, if you're going to be in Europe and you want to create a partnership, those are the models for sure. Again, the jury's still out whether or not the guys, the North American brands themselves, are just going to decide to build themselves or if they're going to partner.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So to close things off today, Allan, the reason I asked this is because the other week I did a podcast with Rickard Wikström of Internet Vikings, so we were speculating about the same thing. And I promised that. So I think my opinion is that the opportunity that I see for the medium-sized operators is to be acquired by land-based casinos who are now obviously struggling for revenue and who are potentially interested in entering the online world as a way to secure their future, basically, make the organization pandemic-proof. So I speculated a bit in, isn't it an opportunity for land-based casinos to acquire the medium-sized operators, because that would be a cheaper way to acquire their expertise, which is what they are lacking, obviously. So I promised Rickard that if we don't see acquisition of a medium-sized operators within the next 3 years, that I would eat my sock.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you're right. I think you're right on. I think it does make sense. It does make sense for a land-based operator to acquire a medium-sized operator from Europe to buy that expertise. I think if you look at the way that M&A, the way that these brands are approaching their acquisition, their M&A stuff, there would have to be a really compelling technical reason as well. Because I mean, look, these offline brands understand how important the tech component is to going online. So, if you were to sort of shortlist the mid-sized operators that could be acquired by an offline operation here in the US, they would definitely have to have some really compelling tech, some of their own proprietary tech for those guys to want to acquire. But yeah, I mean, look, I think that could be smart. You never know with these guys how these deals go, right? I mean, these deals come out of nowhere sometimes, and it's like, well, that's interesting. Okay, but yeah, I think it would be smart. I think you'd have to have the challenge is that, I mean, the challenge is some of these mid-sized operators are bigger in terms of their, in terms of their revenue. They're bigger than what the total opportunity is for them once they come into the US market because of how fragmented it is. So that's going to be the challenge is, hey, you're going to go and acquire an asset overseas that you have to be able to extract that value. You have to be able to extract value out of them in their overseas markets as well as here domestically. And it's got to be complementary as well. So yeah, I mean, we've seen a couple of ideas floated like that, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I would say you're probably spot on. In the next 3 years, there should be at least one, potentially more acquisitions of mid-sized European operators by North American operations for sure.
My sock is safe for now.
I think so.
Brilliant, Allan. Thank you so much for coming on today, Allan. It's super interesting to hear your thoughts on all of this. There's so much more to discuss on your expertise and data collection and the trends that are going on, but I think we covered a lot today at least. So yeah, thank you, Allan. And last question for you: where is Analytics in 5 years' time? Let's say, what's your ambition of your company?
Man, 5 years' time. So look, I think my big vision is I don't think humans should be involved in the optimization of digital campaigns. I think look, there's the technology and the data exists for the robots to do it themselves. I think I think you're going to see a lot more data and technology democratization at the operator level, and that's part of what we're helping to empower. And I think that you're just going to have my sort of the holy grail for us in terms of what we want to be able to produce is to create a platform that allows that's just sort of almost like an ATM for the operators. You put money in, you put inputs in, and the outcomes results, and those results are optimized by the algorithms. The human touch in terms of campaign optimization should not be there. There's not we can't do it efficiently. As efficiently as the algorithms can do. So that's really what I believe in will happen in the next 5 years.
Great. Well, I for one welcome our robot marketing overlords. So thank you so much, Allan, for today. Have a good day.
Thanks, Priya. Cheers.